Welcome to It's a New Day. My name is James Young. Today we're going to be talking about domestic violence and domestic abuse. And today my guest is?
Wanda Chief Operating Officer of Wilson Commencement Park. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Please tell us a little bit what you do.
Wilson Commencement Park is a supportive housing program for single parents. We have a 2-year stay, and the parents with their children live on campus. We have 68 2- and 3-bedroom units, and we provide them with case management, life skills workshops. We also provide them with childcare that's on site. Our childcare is open to the community as well. So we provide them with any services that will assist them in becoming self-sufficient. And our goal is to end poverty within the family household, as well as homelessness. We want to get the parents to a point where they can sustain their household and be self-sufficient and be role models to their children, so that their children as well can become productive members of society.
Today I'd like to talk to you about domestic abuse, domestic violence. Do you have a definition? How closely can we get to a definition of what domestic violence or domestic abuse is?
Well, that's the interesting question. There's many definitions of what domestic abuse or violence is. Many people when they hear domestic violence, the first thing they're thinking is physical violence. And so, yes, if someone strikes you, spits on you, punches you, kicks you, bites you, I already said that. If they do any type of physical harm to you, your partner, that is considered domestic violence. There's also emotional abuse. And what that means is someone calling you fat, stupid, ugly. No one's going to want you. No one would love someone as stupid as you. That's considered emotional abuse, and that is just as detrimental to an individual and to their children as well. There is also control that goes on within the relationship that's considered abuse. So someone trying to isolate you from your family or your friends, telling you, don't go with your family this weekend, stay home with me, don't go out with your friends, or why does your family have to visit? You know, it's just really trying to isolate the individual. That's considered a form of domestic abuse. So there's many forms of domestic abuse, and violence is not just one of them.
Can you go in and talk a little bit from a personal point of view? We've talked off camera. And would you share a little bit about your life and your history and how you became aware of all of this?
First let me say that domestic abuse is not just men committing domestic abuse or violence. Women as well are abusers. Unfortunately, society, we concentrate on the male. And it's unfortunate because of the fact that when men are being abused, because we don't have the same support system in place for men, they cannot get help. And domestic abuse destroys a family household because it affects everyone within the household, as well as the abuser's family and the victim's family. And so it's very important to understand that domestic abuse does not discriminate. And it could happen to anyone. You could be poor, you could be middle class, and you could be rich, and you could still experience domestic abuse as well as be an abuser. So for me, I was 15 when I met my ex-husband. And he probably wouldn't have considered himself an abuser. But there were a lot of signs. There was a lot of control issues going on. Don't wear this, don't do that, don't say this, don't say that. You're talking too much. You shouldn't look that way. You shouldn't talk to so-and-so. And those types of little red flags. Of course, I didn't think they were red flags because I thought, well, it's my boyfriend. He loves me. He cares for me. He's just looking out for me. Until the physical abuse started, I didn't realize that I was in domestic abuse. I was experiencing that. And unfortunately, I would say about 5 to 6 years before I really realized what was, going on within my household. I wasn't the typical teenager. And I would say that I say that because, I moved out, we got married, and then had children. Okay. We were financially stable, and we were doing well for ourselves. And so it wasn't your typical story that society believes, that you're poor and uneducated, and you don't have a support system or a family that cares, and that's why you go through all these devastating things in life.
Before you go further, are there signs that you can detect that something isn't right here?
Absolutely. If anyone, and I think I really want to make sure that the youth understand that when your partner, whether it's a girl or a guy, says to you, "Don't wear that. Don't say that. I don't want you going anywhere. I want you to stay home. You're stupid. You're fat. You're ugly." Those are all signs of potential problems. No one should be calling their partner stupid, fat, or ugly. No one should be if you feel that you're in a situation where you feel less than, and that is being directed to you from your partner, that's a huge red flag. Unfortunately, we don't really realize that we're experiencing domestic abuse until we are either struck, physically abused.
That was going to be my next question, is that when someone says these particular things to you, how does one react, or is it because you don't really react towards those statements? And is that what gives the abuser confidence to say more or to become more extreme?
Some people don't react to it and just see it as a normal exchange. And they may as well say, well, you're fat too and you're stupid too, and think, well, it's okay. But there are people that just don't react at all. Now, there will be people that react to it, and then the physical violence comes right after that.
Okay.
But it really, it varies so much. So one of the most important things is that when you feel that you are in an uncomfortable situation with your partner, whether you're feeling emotionally like, wow, that really hurt me, that they would say that to me, or if you feel scared, if you feel that maybe if I say something, he might act out physically, those are all signs that something isn't right. A normal relationship is about communication. You're supposed to communicate back and forth on the good and the bad and the ugly. So you're supposed to say, don't say that, that's hurtful.
Okay.
And if your partner cannot say, wow, I'm sorry, I didn't even realize I said that.
Okay.
That's a red flag as well, but at least you're talking about it. The second time, you can't say, well, I didn't know that bothered you. So there are ways to begin to address them, but they must be addressed right away.
Okay.
And it's just like a kid. You let a kid go and touch this and touch that, and then you tell them, 3 days later, don't do that. Well, they've been doing it for 3 days. Now you're telling them not to do it. They're like, what? What's going on?
The inevitable question, and that is, if you realize that this is an abusive situation, why do you stay? And that is the biggest question that everyone asks of someone who's in an abusive relationship. Why do you stay? Why do they stay?
Why do people stay married for 25, 30, 40, 50 years?
Yeah.
Have there ever been any problems in that relationship? I'm sure there has. I think when people are in relationships, the first thing that they're thinking is not to leave.
Okay.
Is to work it out. And it sounds crazy. Well, why would you want to work out somebody that beats you or somebody that, degrades you? I can't answer that question for every woman and man in America. I could only say that I do believe that people stay because they are either truly in love with their partner and they are thinking that this is something they could work through, or they're scared. And, imagine being terrified of someone and you live with that person. You're afraid to sleep. You're afraid to eat. You're afraid to say anything. And you're asking this person to just up and leave?
Now, I can't even begin to imagine living with a spouse, someone that's supposed to love you, that you're supposed to love, and being dreadfully terrified of this individual. That's got to be a horrible set of circumstances. How does one live like that?
It's difficult,
Yes.
and every day it's a survival of the fittest, if you may. I believe that if victims and survivors understood how strong they really are, because they did stay for however long they stayed and they put up with a lot of abuse, they probably would have left a lot earlier. People stay because they're fearful. I've met a lot of women in my life who we have helped through Wilson Commencement Park and through other organizations that I worked for. And, you know, they're determined to make sure that their children are safe. And they love their partners. Even though they are abusers, they still love them. And so they feel that if they leave or if they press charges, they're hurting their partner. You know, the Bible says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Our society, it doesn't normally think that way because that's harmful. It's a harmful way of thinking. A victim has been abused enough. And so when they are seeing that they're put in a position of power where they can harm their abuser, 90% of the time they say, no, I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
Because, you know, they feel that they're just taking the same role as the abuser. Not to say that people don't leave, but statistically, a woman will leave 7 times. She will leave her abuser 7 times before she actually leaves them for good. And that's not 7 incidences where the police come, you know, or he beats her and then he leaves and comes back. Or she leaves for a couple days and comes back. It's literally getting up and leaving, and the abuser understanding, I'm leaving you. That's 7 times of those actual moments where they get up, grab their things, grab their children, and physically leave the home. Imagine, you know, emotionally and mentally where an individual is at that's been abused. You know, we could really look at, and this may be extreme, some people may think this is an extreme example, but imagine people that are being tortured. You know, right now we have our wars that are going on for whatever reason. People justify wars. And there have been cases of extreme torture to get whatever the opposing side wants from that individual or that country or that government. Mm-hmm. Imagine the psyche of that individual that's being tortured.
Exactly.
Some people have a chance to run away and they choose not to.
That brings me into, you know, after you've been physically beaten, mm-hmm. you know, once again, how do you forgive that? What is the mindset of this person now that they've been beaten? Mm-hmm. I mean, how can one process that as being loved or, well, maybe he didn't mean it, or somehow the person that's been abused, they're being led to believe that somehow it's their fault. Mm-hmm. If you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have done Absolutely. That. If the food had been cooked properly, mm-hmm. I wouldn't have had to slap you or whatever that physical act mm-hmm. is.
An abuser will always justify their actions after the incident. And the individual is brainwashed to believe that it has...
How do you feel? What kind of... I can't begin to understand the emotional feeling, mm-hmm. the mental feeling mm-hmm. after having someone physically abused you. Mm-hmm. I mean, what is that? What is going through your head? Mm-hmm.
And that's classical conditioning.
Okay.
You know, you condition someone to do what you want them to do, and when they don't, you punish them. That's classical conditioning. America is built on classical conditioning. We condition our pets so that they can be housebroken. We condition our children so that they can pay attention and follow rules. We are conditioned as adults by laws that govern our society. We are also conditioned by what societal norms are. So abuse is all about conditioning your victim so that you can continue, so that you can do whatever you want with them, basically, and get whatever you want from them. I could tell you that after an abuse incident, you know, coming back and saying, I love you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. You know, a victim feels guilty for whatever they did to make their partner angry. they're conditioned to think that it's all their fault because that's all you hear. If you wouldn't have said that, if you wouldn't have done this, I come home, I'm tired. Or I just want a little bit of time. I just want this. I just want that. So you're conditioned to believe that it is your fault. And a lot of times, victims spend a lot of time thinking, how can I be better? How can I be better so that he's happy or so that she's happy and, he doesn't hit me or he doesn't call me fat or doesn't kick me or, whatever is going on in the household. So there's a lot of that going on. How can I be better for that individual?
How does this impact children? Well, before I ask you that question, does an abuser of a spouse, does that mean that they will abuse the children too, or will they just basically abuse the spouse and not the children?
It varies.
Okay.
It could be, just the spouse that's being abused. It could be both the children and the spouse. Again, that varies from household to household. There's no generalization when it comes to the domestic abuse.
And what is
they may also, they may also abuse the family members. It doesn't just have to be the children. It could be the parents. It could be the sisters or brothers, the cousins. I mean, it's a trickle down effect.
Yes.
It impacts the whole family. More importantly, when a victim, it will be isolated by their abuser because that's how you can control someone. If you're the only person, interacting with the individual. If I'm an abuser and I want to control you and everything you do, I want you to only focus on me. And so your only friend, your only outlet is me. So I don't want you talking to your mom. I don't want you talking to your dad, your best friend. I am the person you will talk to. I'm your best friend, your lover, your brother, your sister, your mother. I will be the only person that you can reach out to. And so that happens a lot with abuse. You're isolated. Now, when the family starts, saying, something's not right here, and they start becoming a part and a part of the abuse, and what I mean by that is they can come in and say, I want to help you. I want to help you, and I want to help you get out of this. What can I do for you? Depending on the abuser, they may begin to abuse the parents. So they may tell the victim, if you leave or if you tell anybody, I'll hurt your parents. I will, and I had an incident like this happen in my current position. We had a young lady that came to Wilson, and she was coming to Wilson probably twice a week, and she would do a little bit of the application every time she came in. It took her about a month to complete the application to enter the program because she would just sneak away when she was supposed to be at work. She would take her break and come to Wilson and start, her application process. And I sat down with her one day and I said, I'm worried about you. Are you safe to go back home? Because she came in, she has some bruises. She said, yeah, everything's gonna be okay. She goes, I can't leave now. And I said, okay, well, how can I help you? And she said that he had threatened to harm her parents, and her parents are elderly. And she said, and I'm very, very worried. I said, well, we can talk to the police about that and get them an order of protection as well. So that you'll see a lot of that. The abuse is not just centralized on the partner. It could go to the children can be abused as well as the parents, as well as the external family members. So that's very important to understand.
Okay.
So because it's easy for me to say, okay, I'll leave, but how is it going to impact my family members around me?
And how does this impact children? Children seeing, this is more than just an argument. This is way beyond more than just a spat or a fight that the children are seeing. They're actually now seeing their father physically hit their mother. I guess here, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. I would assume pulling hair, grabbing her. How does this impact children?
It's devastating for a child. Children are developing rapidly. Their mental development, their physical development, their emotional development. And it's detrimental to that development, any type of abuse. And also there's a desensitization, they get desensitized, as they see more and more abuse. And mom, I wouldn't say accepting it, but mom being abused frequently, but mom's still in the relationship. So there's a battle that's going on for that child. Of course, no child wants to see their parents in pain or abused. So emotionally, they're going through a lot. If they're being abused and they have no one to turn to. So if the mom is being abused and the children are abused, who are the children feel that they can turn to? No one. So there's a lot of mental health issues that develop from abuse. We have a lot of children that act out in school. They have behavioral problems. They have self-esteem problems. There's a lot of if you look at the education system, there's a lot of children that aren't doing well in school. It's not necessarily because they just don't want to do good or they don't care or they're not, but a lot of them aren't focused because there's a lot of issues at home that maybe the teacher has no idea about. So domestic abuse impacts the child in every aspect of their development.
Would a daughter be likely to gravitate to having a boyfriend like her father, an abuser?
I think a daughter or son can either become abusers or be abused. And I don't think that it's exclusive to a family that's going through domestic abuse. I don't believe that if you are not exposed to domestic abuse, that means you will not get into a relationship with someone who can be abusive. But I think that our children are sponges, and what they're exposed to can really impact them in a negative way. It can impact them in a positive way. I mean, you can have a child that comes from an abusive relationship and says, I'll never do that in my life, and become an advocate and become, an activist and be the best father and husband, in the world. But then you can have a daughter that was brought up in domestic abuse and be an abuser and abuse her children and abuse her husband.
How did you find your way out of that situation? What did it take for you to finally say, okay, this is enough. I've got to do something about this?
Yeah, I met a case manager from Wilson Commencement Park in a social setting, and she just started talking to me. And every time she saw me, she talked to me a little bit more. She was digging, She said, you smile and you act like everything's okay, but there's something in your look that isn't right. What's going on? Do you want to talk about it? I'm like, oh no, everything's perfect. And everybody till this day, right, says, oh, you should be a comedian because you're always cracking jokes and you're always. So that was my defense mechanism. Of course, I was always cracking jokes. I was the light of the party, always around my peers or coworkers. You would have never thought that anything was wrong, because that was my way of, deflecting and making sure that no one knew what was going on. But she kept going and she kept going until one day, we talked, and she said, there's a great program and there's a better future for you and there's hope. And whenever you're ready, I'm here for you. And so we talked a little bit more, and I realized that it was time to get out of the relationship, because I wanted something better for my children. I was afraid that my children weren't being abused as much, but I was afraid that they were going to become abusers or enter into an abusive relationship. So I wanted to make sure that I did what I had to do, even if it meant that I would, I would suffer the consequences, whatever those consequences turned out to be. I said, it's time to do it. So I moved to Wilson Commencement Park, and I was able to really understand what domestic abuse was all about, and the fact that domestic abuse is about control. And I would say that no one wants to be an abuser. I would truly say that. I don't think anyone wakes up and says, I'm going to be, a domestic violence abuser, and I'm just going to, I'm going to make it, I'm going to master it, But I do believe that there are a lot of human beings that have issues with their coping skills, have a lot of insecurities, and how that's manifested in their physical actions. You can either choose to deal with your insecurities in a positive way, or you could choose to deal with them in a negative way. And when people choose to, not be productive and really work on their issues, they take it out on others. And that's the unfortunate part. And so I knew it was time to go. I came to Wilson Commencement Park, and I was given a beautiful apartment. I was able to talk to my case manager and really understand what were my barriers to moving forward. There was a lot of emotional abuse that went on. There was a lot of self-esteem building that I had to go through. And I had to understand that, and there was a lot of guilt for me as well, because I felt that I've taken my children away from their father, from their stable home, financially stable home. And at the same time I said, wow, you know, I've exposed them to violence, you know, and what does that say about me as a parent? So it was a lot going on, a lot that I had to deal with, a lot that I had to say, okay, that's the past. I didn't make good decisions because I chose to stay, and I chose to let it go as far as I did. But it was a moment where it's a new day, it's a new beginning. And how can I ensure that I take care of myself and work through all my insecurities and get to a point where I could trust anyone, you know? I mean, not just a partner, not in a romantic relationship, but just a coworker, a peer. You know, there was a lot of trust issues for me. And so I had to start working on how can I trust you? If we're talking and you ask me, oh, so where do you live? I would shut down. Oh, so where do you work? Why do you want to know? You know, it's that paranoia that you go through initially, like, well, why do you want to know? You know, no one wants to be hurt. And once you escape the abuse, it's almost like you start isolating yourself again, you know. When you're in an abusive relationship, you'll be isolated. Your abuser will isolate you from from your support system. But what I noticed for me is that when I left my abuser, I isolated myself because I was so afraid to trust anyone. And I said, well, if my husband, you know, abused me, who are you? You know, and you'll probably take advantage of me too, and you'll probably abuse me or my children. So I isolated myself even after I left. And it took me a while to understand that that's what I was doing. I thought I was protecting my family unit. In reality, I was isolating myself and not working on, you know, the mental abuse, and not working on the fact that I had to understand what my barriers were, what my deficiencies were, and work on those.
I'm wondering, how does a mother gather up the children and say, and I don't know, sneak away in the night or the day, or how do you pack your children up?
You don't pack.
In your situation, were you one of the fortunate ones because you actually had a place to go? What about the woman that wouldn't have been able to get into a place like this? What does she do?
Well, there's homeless shelters, you know, get a bad rap. You know, when we think about homeless shelters, we think about a dingy, dirty, unsafe environment. In reality, the homeless shelters here in Rochester are very well taken care of.
Okay.
And women that choose to leave, they can go to 111 West Fall Road to DHS, Department of Human Services, and let them know that they are homeless and they are victims of domestic violence, and they will house them. There is a different track for victims of domestic violence versus someone just homeless. Okay. And so a lot of individuals go to Alternative for Battered Women, which is a homeless shelter, and they also have supportive services there. And they're placed in homeless shelters so that they can find other housing alternatives. Some people come to Wilson, some people go to the YWCA, some people go to Sojourner House, some people go to Mercy Residential. So there's a couple of supportive housing programs in Rochester, which are excellent, and we're all passionate about helping the individual get to that stable self-sufficiency. So there's definitely places for individuals to go, but it's scary. It's scary because a lot of people that are leaving their abuser, they're not packing. You know, they're not asking people, oh, can I get some boxes? Do you have any spare boxes? Oh, by the way, you know, I'm going to leave him in the middle of the night, so I need to, you know, box my kitchen up, you know, box the toys up. You don't get to do any of that. You leave with the clothes on your back, and you leave everything behind. Now, your worldly possessions, you know, everybody says you could replace that. But for a child, you know, it's difficult. So a lot of children have gone to school And when they leave school, they end up in a homeless shelter. Imagine what that does to a child. You know, you're not coming back home. You have none of your belongings, none of your clothes. Or if you do, everything's thrown in a garbage bag. You know, just kind of thrown in there because it's a rapid fire type of move. So, yeah, you don't get to pack, unfortunately. You know, you don't get to say, I'd like to take these pictures. I'd like to take my parents' pictures, my children's, you know, pictures, or their favorite toy. And so there's a lot of emotional trauma that comes along with leaving your abuser as well, if you're going into a homeless shelter. Wilson Commencement Park has a project-based program where we have 18 units that we partner with the Rochester Housing Authority. And these units are furnished units. And so if you're in a homeless shelter, you're coming into Wilson, you're coming into a furnished unit. That's been criticized because people say, well, you know, you're just giving them everything. You know, it's a handout. And well, it's not a handout, because imagine, I want you to become stable and I want you to be a productive member of society, but you have nothing. You don't have any clothes. You don't even have a toothbrush. You don't have any pots and pans, any towels, linen, clothing, furniture. And when I say furniture, I'm not talking lavish furniture, right? I'm talking about the basics: a living room set, a bedroom set, a dining room set for you to sit down and have dinner with your children, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with your children. These are all basic living needs that we take for granted. And at times people say, well, that's a luxury. Actually, it's not a luxury. It's a basic living need that we all should have. And your basic living needs gets you to a point where you can be stable and you can become productive. So that's one of the things that I believe makes Wilson very unique, in the fact that we're looking at fulfilling your basic living needs when you enter our program so that you can work on greater, bigger things: employment, education, your mental health, substance abuse, any legal issues you may have. Those are most important. So we want to make sure that we provide them with supportive services, and that the support is also the actual worldly possessions that we all, take advantage.
Now, I'd like the viewing audience to know that there is life after abuse.
Absolutely.
That you survived this, that you've gone through this situation, through this experience, gone through the program, and now the beauty of this is that now you are at where you are now employed, where you were at. So I'm hoping that gives women or people that go through a situation like this the strength to know that you can survive this, and not only survive it, you can really get your life back in order.
Absolutely.
But would you speak on some of that, and give women some, I would say women in particular, because what we're talking about, but for them to see that they can get their lives back in order. This isn't the end of the world.
And let me say that I think I'd like to speak to individuals that consider themselves non-victims, which is people that have never experienced domestic violence or abuse in their life. There's a stigma that goes with domestic violence. Oh, she likes it. Oh, she's staying. Well, if she's staying, that's her problem, And, well, why don't she just leave? If it was me, I would leave. But those are the things that we need to stop. Those are ignorant remarks, because no one knows what they would do if they were put in that type of situation. No one knows. And instead of, judging individuals, victims, children, or even judging the abuser, it's about reaching out and saying, I'm not going to let you live in silence. And come what may, I'm going to support you. If you choose to stay, let's think of a safety plan. If you choose to leave, let's think of a safety plan. How can I help you? I went and spoke at a domestic violence conference. And one of the things that I said, and it was a faith-based conference, and one of the things I said is, there's a silence that comes with being a victim, because many people are judged instead of trying to be understood, and judged instead of having people assist them. And, you know, the first thing that we want to do is we want to remove that person from the abuse and say, well, you could stay with me, or let's put you here. And then we get upset when the victim goes back to the abuser. And then we just completely say, wash our hands with them. And say, well, you went back, that's up to you. I don't want nothing to do with it. Instead of trying to understand that it's not as easy as just getting up and leaving. There's a lot of issues that we need to educate ourselves on to help an individual in the problem. You know, if there's a problem, but the solution isn't always to leave ASAP. Yes, we would like people to remove themselves from domestic violence situations, but sometimes it takes time to really develop a safety plan, depending on the severity of the abuse, depending on the abuser, and the what connections does this abuser have? So let's say you have someone who's in politics, very powerful, and they're your abuser. Do you think it would be that easy to just up and leave? Let's say your abuser is a police officer. Very difficult. So, or, you know, even a community leader. You know, we tend to think that these type of individuals would never abuse their partners, when in reality, you know, it could happen to anyone. You could be the president of the United States, or you could be someone working at McDonald's. It doesn't matter. And so as individuals, as community members, as community leaders, we need to stop judging. And we just need to say, how can I help you? And let the victim tell you how you can assist them.
Okay.
Because I think that that's very important. You know, we always have solutions to problems. As a provider, you tell me your problem, I have a solution for you. You know, you could tell me anything, I know exactly how to handle that problem. But those solutions are me being removed from the problem. You know, you really need to sit down and talk to the victim and say, how can I help you? What would be the safest way for you either to leave, if that's what they want to do, or for you to stay?
I'm looking at this from the male perspective because many times behavior that we do, we thought or we think that this is being a man. Somehow along the way we thought, because this woman is in a relationship with us, listen, don't wear that. And somehow that feels right, being a guy saying that. And, or either, I can see where you're saying, I don't want you to be with this friend, but without understanding, because we've been led to believe that we're supposed to be the boss.
You haven't figured it out yet, you're not?
That these are, that somehow we have associated this stuff. I mean, many of the things that you're talking about earlier, not so much the physical abuse, and not even so much the sarcastic or the emotional abuse, you're fat, you're ugly, not even doing that, but these other little subtleties that we do, those have been incorporated into what a guy does when he's in a relationship without understanding that this is controlling, that this is abusive, because we've been led to believe that this is what a guy does.
Right.
You know, how do we begin to make this become, how do we sensitize this? How do we make men become better?
That's a loaded question. I think one of the things that, and this is from a female perspective, there's a breakdown in the family unit. There's a breakdown in society. And it's unfortunate to see many single parents. And there are many wonderful single fathers, but the majority are single mothers. So there's an absent parent in the household. And you know, unfortunately, you know, our society believes that in order to be considered a man, you must be masculine. And masculinity also is about, you know, how the power that you have over others. And you should be unemotional, and you should, you know, be physical as well. So I don't know how to solve that problem globally. I can say that every man should teach another young man, whether it's their child, a nephew, or just a friend. Teach them that being a man is not about strength. It's not about your physicalness. It's about how you treat others and how you empower those around you. Understanding that for women as well, one of the biggest things that I believe is leaders must produce leaders. And when I say that, we are all leaders. You don't have to have a title to be a leader. But anyone that you come in contact with, you can be a leader to them. And it's very simple to be a leader, because all you have to be is have a genuine concern and genuinely care for the next individual and make sure that they're doing well. And so that to me is being a leader. And so men, we need to lead young men. Women need to lead young women. And understanding that, what defines you is not the exterior. It's not how hard you are. It's not how many people you beat up. It's not how many people you can tell what to do. It's about you extending your hand to the next person and the assistance that you provide. I think that, in our society today, we've lost that. It's all about me, me, me. And, we cannot become a greater society and a society of love and hope when all we're doing is taking away from each other. I had a conversation with a colleague about a week ago, and she said, it's sad to see minority women hating on each other. And I said, wow, what do you mean? She said, well, I know a lot of professional women, and whenever they see another professional woman, getting promoted or doing well, it's like, oh, huh, there's that animosity. And I said, wow, that's sad. I said, that's sad. Because, we're all fighting for the same thing, and that is to be happy, healthy, and live well. And we all want that for our children. So when anyone, does well, we should celebrate that. And so I believe that when we start talking about roles, about being masculine and about what a man is supposed to do, or what being feminine and what a woman's supposed to do, that's where we go wrong, because we start categorizing. And an abuser has a lot of insecurities and wants to control everything around them. So when we begin to classify, instead of embracing each other, instead of not hating, when someone is progressing, we need to embrace one another. I believe that domestic violence doesn't come because the abuser is upset with their victim. It's external factors that brings that individual to abuse the person that they're with. So it could be, at work. It could be, fellow peers. That individual is just having all these issues, so if they're taking it out on their partner.
I would like to believe that an abuser can become reformed and
I believe so.
Can become better.
I believe so.
Because I believe, after listening to you, that what this truly is about is people being better to one another.
Absolutely.
And somehow we have gone away from the fact that I guess what a relationship really should be. Really two people coming together. The best way I like to say is by Khalil Gibran, two trees but casting one shadow. Tell us what goes on now over at Wilson Commencement House and how this program can help individuals and how we can begin to readdress some of the issues that some of the women are faced with, and how we can turn some lives around.
Well, about 76% of the residents at Wilson Commencement Park are domestic violence victims, survivors.
Are they all women?
Right, currently there are. But
could admit it.
but we also have had single men go through the
Okay.
program, correct. So currently we have 100% all women, but that doesn't
Okay.
mean it'll be like that tomorrow. Okay, so if you know of any single parents, single men, single fathers, and they need a place like Wilson, please send them our way.
Very good.
We develop successful families. That is our, mantra. Every day, what we want to do is develop successful families. And what I mean by that is not just about the parent. We work with the child too. So we have an accredited child care center on site that has a high school curriculum, which is a evidence-based best practices curriculum. And so the children go through the curriculum, and the parent is also going through their own curriculum. We work on financial literacy, we work on stabilizing and strengthening the family unit. We want them to understand child development. We want them to understand better parenting techniques. Not that they're not good parents. You know, a lot of times when you say to someone, come take a parenting class, you know, the defense walls go up. You're going to teach me how to raise my child? No, absolutely not. But there are great techniques that you can implement in your household that can help you communicate with your child better, understanding child development. And sometimes we say, well, why does he do that? Well, because he's developing, and that's natural. It's normal. So we teach parents on how to embrace that child development that could sometimes be very frustrating, embrace child development and understand it so that they can develop with their child. We also work on improving their health and wellness. So we want them to get any type of mental health issues. We want them to get therapy for it. We want them to understand that that's normal. Culturally, you know, in Latino and Black culture, we don't like going to therapy. We're not going to talk to anybody about what's going on in our house because that's just craziness right there. We need to stop. You know, we need to understand that talking to someone or going to seek help is actually the best thing that you can do for your family and yourself. And once we understand that, that's what we want our residents to understand. You're getting help. This actually says a lot about you in a positive light, not a negative light. So once they understand that, we have support groups. We talk about domestic violence. We talk about stress and anxiety. We have a healthy eating program. We also have a physical fitness program because we want them to be healthy, completely, mentally, physically healthy. And we want the children to also understand the importance of being healthy. You know, there's a lot of fast food restaurants and make a lot of money off of our children and off of our families. And there's a lot of health disparities that come with not eating healthy and not being healthy. So we have implemented a program to really talk to every individual family about what's going on in your household when it comes to what are you eating, what are you buying, you know, to cook, and what is your physical fitness like, you know, so how can we help you be healthier, okay? And then we talk about permanent housing. So they'll be with us for 2 years, and in those 2 years, they're going to learn a lot of new skills. They're going to learn how to sustain a household. They're going to learn how to become employed and stay employed, which is very important. You know, we think we'll just get you a job and our job is done. But in reality, we need to educate people on how to stay employed. So we do all that with them while they're with us for 2 years, and then we want them to move into permanent housing.
When they're there for the 2 years, are they employed or?
Yes. In order to be in our program, you either have to be employed full-time or go to school full-time or have a combination of both. Okay. Yeah, you're not going to come to Wilson and kind of sit on your hands and wait. We want you to understand that we want to simulate real life as much as possible, right? And so they pay their rent, they pay their utilities, and they work or go to school. Mm-hmm. And we're their support system. So that's what we do. And I tell everyone that comes into Wilson, you are 90% of your success. Wilson is just 10%. Okay. We will guide you and we will refer you and point you in the right direction, but you must walk towards the right direction.
Have there ever been any abusers come to the facility demanding their spouse?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We are a gated community and we have security on campus. We have surveillance cameras, but you know, nothing is 100%. So we have had abusers come, and you know, the Rochester Police Department is a wonderful asset, and we have a great relationship with them. And they just happen to be right behind us as well, but that doesn't mean anything. They're wonderful, and if we have any issues, they're there promptly, and they take care of the issue.
Do you ever truly heal from this? Do you ever truly able to say, okay, this was a bad decision, that this was a bad person that I was with, that you can open yourself up again and say, this is a kind of loving situation that I would like to be in? Can you evolve to that?
I believe so, but it takes a lot of work, and it takes you really, you know, reaching out for help and understanding, you know, building yourself back up, because I think that that's one of the biggest issues. You have to forgive yourself and you have to heal. And once you understand, you know, all the resources available to you, and you really take a concerted effort to really focus on building yourself back up, of course you can heal.
Okay.
Absolutely you can heal. And I think also when you start helping others and you start educating others and you start talking about your story, I think that that's also great for healing, because now you've broken through that isolation, and now you're reaching out to others to say, you know, I went through what you went through and I made it out. You can too. And so that's all a process of healing. And I think that that is one of the biggest milestones in anybody's life, when you could sit down and talk to someone else and assist them, you know, with leaving or with thinking about a safety plan.
If someone in the viewing audience wanted to contact you, would that be available? Would that be available?
Wilson Commencement Park,
Okay.
263-7930.
Very good.
And whatever we can't help you with, we will refer you to someone who can.
Very good.
We are another thing about Wilson Commencement Park is that we have a collaborative nature, and we will not isolate anyone from receiving help, because I think that that's very important. You know, with nonprofits and community-based organizations, there's very little funding. So you might see some organizations battling with each other because we're all trying to get the same monies. But one of the things about Wilson that we are dedicated to is helping the individual. So if I have to send them to you, I'm going to send them to you. If I can help them, I will. And if we can help them together, even better.
I thank you so much for coming on to the show. You've given me a wealth of information, and I'm certainly hoping that we have brought some new light to this particular problem. And I'm certainly hoping that we can get people to start enjoying and loving each other much better.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.